It's definitely fortunate because there's a lot of bonuses to AI. But I mean, at the end of the day, it's definitely not replacing anybody. It's just making them more efficient. And for lawyers specifically, they can take that time back to take more cases, spend more time with their family, chase other dreams that they may have outside of the legal space. But yeah.
Sharp strategies, sweet success.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is Tiffany Swedensky, and you're listening to Sharp Strategies, Sweet Success. Today, I am here with my guest, Katie Carlson from Faster Outcomes. I'm pretty sure Katie and I met on LinkedIn, where I tend to spend a little bit of time, and I'm sure she does too. And I think this is her and I's first face-to-face meeting, so I'm just getting to know her. So I'll let her do her introduction. So Katie, can I tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Katie Carlson, Director of Marketing here at Faster Outcomes. Thanks so much for having me. Excited to be here. I'm typically on the other end as I do all of the podcast production for our podcast, Legal Keys. So it's definitely a fun change of speed. And going back a bit, we definitely got introduced through Ben Glass, but through the legal world, we had him on our podcast. And then he was like, you should get connected with Tiffany type of deal. So here we are. And it's a pleasure. A little bit about myself. I have been at Faster Outcomes for about a year now, coming up on a year. I came from previous marketing role that was actually not in the legal space. It was in power sports. So I did a mixture of some escalated customer service and then a lot of marketing type of events and community engagement on social media and that kind of thing. Unfortunately, I have a little bit of a personal connection to the legal world from a dog bite and a really bad car accident. But I digress. We're here, and I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation with you.
Yeah, actually, it came all flooding back to me because, yeah, we did get introduced through Ben. And I remember we talked a little bit and talked about just kind of the marketing that you all are doing. And it's actually not too often that people reach out to me about how do we talk to lawyers in this space. So it's always fun to have that type of meeting. So, I mean, just so the listeners know, but tell them a little bit about what Faster Outcomes is and what you guys do.
Yeah, absolutely. So to kind of go back to what Faster Outcomes is doing today, we recently pivoted into healthcare as well, but our primary focus is lawyers. And so we have an AI platform that essentially streamlines a lot of the mundane, repetitive tasks that lawyers do. And that's kind of vague, I get it, but to kind of put it into a nutshell, ChatGPT is a AI open source tool, whereas ours is HIPAA compliant and SOC 2 compliant. And so everything that you're doing is basically your ChatGPT. It's a similar concept, but everything is going to be protected and all of your clients' information is obviously in this secure vault. And so I can definitely expand if you'd like to know a little bit more about our products, but that kind of in a nutshell is what Faster Outcomes does. And AI is happening. It's definitely fortunate because there's a lot of bonuses to AI. But I mean, at the end of the day, it's definitely not replacing anybody. It's just making them more efficient. And for lawyers specifically, they can take that time back to take more cases, spend more time with their family, chase other dreams that they may have outside of the legal space. But yeah.
Yeah. And I talk a lot about AI on the podcast, and I don't know if people get bored with it. There are a few podcasts I listen to that when they bring up AI, I'm like, oh my God. But so you're you're a little bit new to the legal marketing space, just getting to know it. And so I'm kind of curious about your perspective. What have you learned? And maybe if you can elaborate, how are we different than healthcare or something that you worked with in the past?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that more than anything, marketing is definitely a universal concept, but there are these little niches that, something isn't going to speak to a lawyer the same way that it would somebody that's purchasing a power sport toy. And so that's definitely a new vertical that I'm learning. But I think and I've heard really good things about both of them, obviously being newer to the space. We were doing all of the research on good events to go to. And two of the ones that I attended this year were PILMA and the Great Legal Marketing summit. And I think that those were two of the best shows that I could have gone to, being my first year in the space. I had some incredible conversations with people like Jay Berkowitz, Ben Glass, all of those top names that have been around and in the space for the longest time. And so they've been awesome introducing our team and myself to more people. And I feel like the more conversations that I have, the more comfortable I am feeling. I mean, regardless, at the end of the day, I feel like I've been in the marketing space and the creative lane for so long that it's kind of, in a sense, an expertise. But the more that I have these conversations, the more that I can feel like I'm getting to the expertise that you're probably at in legal marketing. And so I think that it's definitely a fine line that I'm still kind of trying to understand, of like, what speaks to lawyers better? Is it more copy, or is it like short, concise little bullet points that aren't necessarily going to tell the whole story, but at least they got them engaged enough to reach out for a conversation? Or do they want to know everything in the most novel type of form? I don't know. I really don't. And I think that's the sweet spot, is that there really isn't a right or wrong answer. I think that it could be different for a personal injury lawyer that it is for a family lawyer, or vice versa. So I don't really know. I think that you may know better than I do, but I really don't necessarily think that it's that different than any other vertical, but it's just understanding what speaks their love language and like capitalizing on that and sticking with like A/B testing of like which one actually sticks and which one is actually never going to stick and they don't want anything to do with you type of vibe.
Yeah, I guess like when I was younger and in college, like I didn't know too many people like lawyers. Like the people I knew were pretty blue collar and stuff. So like my mental image of what a lawyer was very much painted by like TV and stuff. And so it was pretty like eye-opening for me when I got into like the Ben Glass universe and started meeting the attorneys like within his orbit, I guess you'd say. It was kind of shocking to me to realize that they're just normal people. And at some point, because I kind of stepped into that with some web digital marketing knowledge, it also surprised me tremendously that I would know things that they didn't, which you would expect. They're lawyers and I'm a marketer. But then at the same stroke, there are a lot of lawyers who are really smart and know a lot about marketing. I'm not saying you have to be smart to know about marketing, but they're just really good at this stuff. And also, like you mentioned, like everyone's a little bit different, and that's my take too. Like when I talk to attorneys, like I get the sense that they feel like other attorneys are like them, like just the legal law firm business owner, they're not a monolith. They're all so unique and different. And as somebody who talks to, most of my attorneys are personal injury attorneys, but I talk to a lot of personal injury attorneys. They're all so unique and they all have advice on how to deal with other attorneys or how to sell to other attorneys even. And sometimes they'll give advice that I just know from experience is not the best way to go for it. And that's kind of the great quagmire of marketing, is that, you know, everyone's a consumer. Everyone experiences marketing through their own lens and feels like they know how other people might experience it. But that's not the case. Like everyone is just so unique. And, you know, we tend to overestimate how much our experience as consumers gives us as far as like education on marketing, if that makes sense.
Makes complete sense. It definitely like makes my mind go down several different areas that, like, for the business aspect of it, I kind of have an interesting take because my dad is in the construction space and they don't do a ton of marketing whatsoever, but they're a really successful business. They've been in business for 55 years and they are widely known across the Midwest area and mainly Minnesota, but they don't really do a ton of marketing. And it never made sense to me how that worked. But like, because they started that organic way of how my grandpa started the business back in the day, it started by getting clients door knocking. So before any of like actual marketing tools came about, it's just wild to think about how much we've evolved over time. And not to go into that story further, just like in general, it's crazy that the more we evolve in, I mean, it's 2025, and the quicker that like these lawyers and these business professionals can adapt and adopt the technology, like the more that they're going to thrive in their business, because they're understanding as a business owner, this is what others are doing, and we may fall behind if we don't adopt it. And so I think that's an interesting take that I don't know that a lot of lawyers think of it as a business or as a business owner, in the aspect of, I want my business to thrive after I'm gone. And so I think that the way that they put in they implement these different tactics and tools and set their team up for success after they're gone is definitely a concept that not everybody's thinking about. But I think because of the AI age, it's making them have that realization that, wow, we should probably be digitizing things, because the filing cabinet is definitely going away. So I don't know, it definitely brings up a lot of different topics, but that's kind of my take as far as adopting tools goes.
And in my experience, because I mostly worked in legal marketing, but also I spent a few years as a freelancer, and I worked as a freelancer, just a variety, like a smattering of different businesses. And the stuff that I learned as a freelancer, like digital marketing wise, like I'll hear from an attorney like, oh, did you hear about this new thing? And I have to like bite my tongue and be like, yeah, it's super new and cool. Like, but
it's totally new. Yep.
yeah. And I don't know if it's just the legal industry in general, or maybe just the nature of small businesses being kind of slow to adapt to like new technologies. But like, even if you don't include AI, like if, a ChatGPT never launched and we're not talking about LLMs right now, there's still so much technology out there, marketing and otherwise, that law firms still haven't adopted. And it's kind of crazy to think about. It's just like, wow, you're still using server-based case management system. You're not on the cloud yet. Or, wow, you don't have two-factor authentication set up for your internal logins. That is horribly insecure. Like, not, well, insecure in the not secure sense, right? And two-factor authentication is very annoying, but it's critical in protecting like a whole bunch of stuff. And I'm going off on a tangent, but I think when law firms think of like being hacked, they think of somebody at their computer typing code and rapidly combating your systems. But that's not truly what hacking is. Hacking is like social engineering. It's phishing attacks. It's scammy text messages. It's getting people to click on the wrong thing and downloading a program on their browser and capturing their password. And yeah, anyway, like I just feel like there's still this huge technology gap between firms and then stuff I was implementing at other businesses. And I said I wasn't going to talk, but here I went talking a whole lot.
To that point, and I mean, I guess that brings up a question for you, like the law firms that you work with, how much are they using technology? And if they aren't using technology, are you trying to push them to start using it? Or is that something that you're okay with, the old school vibes?
So every law firm I start out with, we're pretty much redoing their integrations. Like I've not yet started working with a firm or have consulted with a firm that has seamless integrations where all of their forms or website forms are pushing to their intake dashboard. And a lot of law firms are still tracking intakes by like phone calls and trust. Like they're just trusting their intake team to report on every call that they took and to classify it accurately. And every law firm I start with, we're starting with those systems. Very rarely am I stepping into a relationship where they have all of that flushed out perfectly. And so I know there's a technology gap because the firms that are killing it, that's how their systems are. A lead comes in, it is in your intake dashboard. And if your intake team is off duty, it's being forwarded to an outside call service that'll follow up with it. And you're not going to beat that if you don't have these systems. And a lot of them don't have these systems.
Yeah, fair take. And I think, and that's funny that you say that too, because when I first started roughly a year ago, I kind of thought that the adoption was a bit further than it actually is. And I think that's a bit refreshing in a sense as well, because as much as it's great, the technology is great, it's like, all right, we also should take things like one thing at a time. And successful implementation at a firm is definitely not going to do well if it's rushed and you have to do it in a systematic way, or obviously it's going to fail or end up being essentially a waste of money. And so I think that's something that it was very interesting to me when I entered the space, that adoption with AI in general and maybe technology like case management is not as far along as I expected it to be, which is, it could be looked at as a good or bad thing. But I think that regardless, at the end of the day, we're all business people and we are doing what's good for the business and looking out for the greater good of the business.
So with AI tools in particular, there's something kind of interesting happening, but a lot of it's either been pitched to me as something for me to build, or I've heard other businesses trying to build their own AI solutions, like their own internal chatbot. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like, is it how there's a lot of AI systems that I use that I build for myself, but they're not like my own custom. Some of them are my own GPTs, but they're not like a replacement for an AI tool that you might buy, right?
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that. Are small law firms really going to be able to build for themselves like their own AI solutions, or is that just kind of a pipe dream?
Personally, I guess I can't speak to the development side of it because developers are a whole different breed compared to me. Like, they can speak and know the internet a lot better than a lot of people do. I don't know what it would take to start like your own in a small law firm, but I do know that larger law firms like Morgan and Morgan have their own proprietary LLM that they're definitely not going to be adopting any sort of the AI tools that are out there right now that my competitors and I offer. They have their own thing, and if anything, they are trying to shoo all of the salespeople away because they've got their own deal. And I thought that was pretty cool, honestly, because it makes sense. They're a massive law firm. Why wouldn't you just keep it all in house? But I think to the point of small law firms, I think they're the easiest to implement outside of like their own law firm. So if they're purchasing, for example, faster outcomes, I think that their implementation can be extremely successful because they're so small, and it gives that one-on-one training aspect that you can actually onboard them and in the most successful way make it make sense from the beginning, because if it's a smaller team. And that's one thing that we've learned, is that the larger AM law firms are having a harder time implementing, obviously, because it is they have way too many people to train. And I think there's a training aspect to it all that definitely needs to happen, because when you're putting things into an open source tool, I don't know that they necessarily are familiar with how much those AI agents are learning off of their information. And if it's confidential client information, obviously a no-no. So I think that there's definitely some training that could happen for the larger law firms. I mean, across the board, if you aren't familiar with what it can do, you should take a step back to understand it. And it's funny because when we talk to people that have never used things like AI before or ChatGPT, we're like, well, just go write a poem or write a recipe for dinner, or just like start small and then understand the capabilities of it and kind of how you can utilize it and amplify your own skills.
I want to back up because you talked about Morgan and Morgan's LLM. So I don't know how much you know about that. I don't really know anything about it.
I want to know more. Like, when somebody told me about it, I'm like, wait, really? That's actually kind of cool. Not that it's any of my business, but it's just kind of fascinating concept.
Is it customer facing or is it just internal?
In my understanding, it's just internal.
Okay. So I guess that makes a little bit of sense, like something internally. Because my husband, he works for a company, and I got to be vague on the details, but they have their own internal LLM because they have to. It's security, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I can't just use ChatGPT for this. And it makes sense for law firms, like you need that kind of security as well. And I guess with Morgan and Morgan, you certainly have the bandwidth or the budget to hire developers. You can outsource the whole thing to an expert team, and there are probably a ton of them. And you just send them the documentation that team needs. They train an LLM and instruct it on certain guidelines. It's certainly like a doable process, and it's very accessible. It's a very accessible kind of development, I guess, because there are a lot of people who are happy to train like GPTs for you. But it's a question of like, is it accessible for the small business owner? Should they do this themselves, or should they just buy into an AI tool?
Mhm.
And these days, like, building automated systems is like easy to do, but like then you have to maintain it. And the maintenance part is hard. And if you want to build AI systems that are complex, you have to basically maintain a connection with a developer who can troubleshoot it. And I think that's the part that people just kind of, if it's built and it's built right, it'll never break. But unfortunately, that's not the nature of online technologies.
And my instincts tell me that, and I could be way off with this. My instincts tell me that maybe they actually like Morgan and Morgan probably have in-house developers and technology team, like a CTO, that are doing all of those things. That would probably make the most sense, given that they have so much data and information that obviously they don't want leaked. And so that's kind of where my mind went, is they most likely have like a whole technology team because they can afford it. So, I mean, that would make the most sense to me, but I guess it would be interesting to know if they were outsourcing that kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, for small businesses, that's the question. Like, what do you bring in house? What do you outsource? Because if you don't do it that much, like it makes more sense to outsource, like podcasts, for example.
Right.
Like you don't need, if you have one single podcast, you don't need one whole full-time podcast editor unless you do it a lot. You can hire a company that'll edit all your podcasts and post them for a third of the amount, maybe less.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a question of like, what do you want the security of having like somebody who you pay less, who has more experience, who works with a bunch of different clients on a similar task? Or what do you want to have like full time in house? That's the question for a lot of business owners, I guess.
Right.
Um,
And kind of to the point of the small law firms, from my own take, and obviously everybody's different. I don't know how long the law firm's been around, or how, say, there's family members that are taking it over. So it makes sense to do it in house if you're a small firm. But I think that if you're a larger firm, it makes more sense to do it in house because you can see the ROI that will come down the line. Whereas if you're a smaller firm, I think there's a greater chance that the adoption could either fall through the cracks, or you lose one person and that you're not able to focus on the fact that you're trying to build this tool. So I could just see a lot of ways that it could go downhill, but I also see that it could probably work as well. It kind of just depends on who's running the business and how, I guess, determined they are to make it a successful in-house LLM. So
yeah.
I don't know. I guess I haven't heard of any small firms making their own tool yet, but
Uh,
I think if you have the money to put up front to hire developers that are very expensive, I've heard numbers of what those type of developers get paid, and it's a little bit insane. It's awesome, but it's insane. Like, you have to have the budget for it. And so if you're able to spend that money up front, by all means, I think it could be an advantage point. But if you don't, I think you can see the ROI by outsourcing, because you're not putting in all of that money to hire a developer.
well, so this is an extreme example, but like Facebook went on a developer hiring spree over the summer because they're developing their own LLM.
Of course they are.
And yeah, of course they are. And they spent like 1 million, over $1 million just to hire one developer. Like that was their sign-on bonus or something. And I might be exaggerating. It's a known
I
story.
mean, I
So
believe it.
yeah.
I've heard of somebody that I know personally that makes $500,000 a year. And I'm just like, I mean, wow, that's amazing. But how did you get to that point? And one of my coworkers brought up the point of like junior developers that are now graduating how do you, like, AI kind of takes over, like AI can write code now. And so AI kind of takes over that junior developer role. And so now there's this weird gap of these higher end developers that have been in the space since before a lot of this took off. And so I don't know. I sure hope that we can keep things human enough that I don't ever want all jobs to get taken over, because I think we all need the human aspect to these things. And that is one thing that we definitely stress at Faster Outcomes, is keeping it human as possible. Like, you're just becoming a more powerful human by utilizing the tools in the correct way.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm hearing more and more, and I love AI tools and I love adopting AI tools. But like, just an example from marketer standpoint, I work with a lot of marketers who are getting started in their career, like 0 to 5 years of experience in legal marketing or just in general. And so I'm working with a lot of junior marketers, and I'm instructing a lot of junior marketers to use ChatGPT. But like, that's not enough. Like, if I ask somebody to use ChatGPT to write marketing copy and they just send me the output without editing it, I know I can read and tell. And I go back to him and say, like, look, this is, if ChatGPT didn't exist and you sent me this as a first draft, I would have been so happy.
Mm-hmm.
But I know this isn't your first draft, and we need to take it from first draft to final draft. And that bridge is human. That final draft bridge is human. And I talk about this sometimes, not a lot, but I'm part of a writers group.
Mm-hmm.
And it is very obvious when a new writer comes into the group, presents their work, and it's entirely or even partially AI. Us older writers, because I fit in that category of older writer at this point, we were writing from before ChatGPT. We saw what a real first-time person's work looked like.
Mm-hmm.
And so we can tell, and also the tells of what ChatGPT writing is are just so obvious that it's painful.
100% agree. And I think that's one thing that sometimes it obviously takes me longer, but when I'm going back and forth with chat of like, I'll put in, here's what I want to say in my own tone, and it'll kind of clean up a couple of this, change some adjectives and like make things a little, and I'm like, oh, I didn't even think of that. That sounds awesome. And so when you can like just put it in there to like clean it up and make it sound a little sharper, that's like the perfect little final touch. But I completely agree that you can tell when something's been written by ChatGPT to the point that I don't know, it doesn't even sound, you can tell, and it's not like you're transacting with a human.
Yeah. And I think that goes for developers as well, because I've built a PC before, but I did use ChatGPT to walk me through building this PC, which I'm gesturing to off camera.
That's really cool. Expand on that a little bit.
I've always been kind of a technical person. I built my first PC back in college when it was like, I just scrap parts that I sourced off like Facebook and stuff, right? This is my first build where it's just like all of the stuff was new and kind of nice. And so I just had that little bit of experience with PC building, enough to go through something like this. But I also used ChatGPT to help me out. It's just like, okay, I did this, like, and I knew enough to know when it was wrong. And it was wrong often enough that it's kind of scary for the stuff that I think about, I also use ChatGPT for. And it's just like, wow, this stuff, ChatGPT is great. And it certainly helped me through a few problems. But there are also problems that I got to that I had to go to Google, or I had to find a YouTube video, or I had to sit there at the manual and like for a while. Yeah. And so when people talk about like, you got to be careful, it hallucinates. Now, I think it's easy to kind of like, yeah, I know it hallucinates sometimes, but the problem is it hallucinates convincingly. And the ChatGPT was trying to have me short out my motherboard at some point. It's like, touch a metal thing to these two connectors. And I was like, hold up. That's an extreme like step for what I'm experiencing. And eventually I figured out I didn't need to do that. That wouldn't have been dangerous. Like, it wouldn't have killed my PC or anything. But it was just like, okay, I think we're going to step 6 when we need to go back to step 2. And I wouldn't have known that otherwise,
And I know what you're talking about when it gives you that weird answer, but at least you actually read the answer and realized, wait, let me take a step back, because that's not the way that I knew how to do that. Or it just sounds goofy. And so then in that aspect, if my thing hallucinated like that, just start a new chat and be like, all right, let's start from square one, because it doesn't even make any sense.
I mean, the chat limit, because I was telling my husband about this, like I have to, after usually like 3 or 4 good responses, it starts getting weird. Like it starts forgetting things we've talked about previously. I have to remind it. And I believe they shorten the memory limit of it, which is why like I build a lot of GPTs. I think a lot of people get a little overzealous. It's like, I'm going to upload all of our company documentation to it. And it can't hold all of that in its memory. Like if you're
Right.
just
And
doing the
if
basic
you
stuff.
want it to review the information to its entirety, it's not going to do a good job of it if you're putting in way too much. Like the way that you
Okay.
put things in there,
Yeah.
there's a systematic way that you should be going about how you're dealing with large files, because it's not going to give you a correct input or review all of it in
Yeah.
the first place.
And I've done this before where I've sent it a link and of my own writing. Like I've sent it a link to something I wrote and I've said, review it, like critique it. And its response, it starts giving me critique and I'm reading it and I'm like, that doesn't apply to what I wrote. And then I asked, I'm like, this doesn't, you're giving me critique for things I didn't write. And then it was like, oh yeah, I couldn't actually visit the link you provided. And I'm like, why didn't you just say? Why didn't you just say I can't visit it? But it gave me like 3 paragraphs of feedback for an imaginary article. And it's just kind of funny. It's kind of funny the way it works like that.
It really is. And it's strange when you make the realization that you think it's smarter than it actually is. And then you do something like that and you're like, well, wait, if you're so smart in all of these things, like you said, why didn't you just let me know that you weren't able to click the link?
Yeah. It's that's why like education about these technologies is really paramount. Like why they're extraordinarily useful. Like every day I use AI. It's ridiculous. But like also it's important to understand like not how it works, but like the best ways to use it and where its like limitations are. And I hope my political leanings are very middle, but I do listen to Joe Rogan. Not as much anymore though, because he keeps talking about how AI is like a digital god or something. And every time I hear him say that, oh my gosh, like I just hate it so bad because he's talking about the singularity when we're discussing LLMs, right? And I think it's important to understand that these technologies are not the
No.
singularity, like that we're not dealing with a digital god yet. It is not sentient. And you know, listening to somebody like Joe Rogan like full-heartedly believe what he is saying, it inspires me to go out there and try to educate people like chill out, like it's not that, it's still really cool, but anyway.
Yeah, no kidding. Like maybe we could be there in like 2075, but we are not there right now, and we don't have to be there right now. If we're trying to keep people employed, obviously we want there to be the human aspect. And yeah, no, technology is not God. However,
Yeah.
like you said, it's a great tool on the tool belt if you know how to use it correctly and you're educated about how things can go wrong, how it can hallucinate, how you can prompt it or train it better. So I if you actually do that, try to go out there and train people. I applaud you for that, because it takes a certain type of patience to try to teach somebody technology that, you know, doesn't even know how to open an email.
Unfortunately, I feel like that kind of AI education is not being well received right now. I'm waiting for public opinion to kind of chill, because if I go out and tell a business owner who's really, really excited about AI that there are limitations and maybe its responses aren't as sophisticated as you think they are, they kind of turn off. They're just like, shut up, Tiffany. You just don't like it for some reason. But I'm starting to see people kind of come around to this fact that AI is fantastic and it's an incredible tool and it's made my life like 20,000 times easier in a lot of respects. But like, it's not the singularity, like, it's not God. And it certainly at this point can't outdo like human creativity or just like human critical thinking. And to believe it can is kind of dangerous. Well, anyway, I don't want to keep talking.
Right.
Like
No, and I agree with that 100%. It's like you cannot go off of what your chat. There was and not to be dark, but there was a really bad story within ChatGPT where this young person was saying things in, and the ChatGPT told him to hurt himself. And it's just like, that's a different thing, that you don't trust it to that extent. Like, that is not your therapist. And I mean, I don't know. It's one of those education things that, what do you do?
We're a little over on time, so I got to wrap up really quick. But the funniest advice I've gotten to get better responses out of ChatGPT is to act like you're desperate. So to throw something in there like, please, my job is on the line, I need a great response. It'll think longer, literally, and it'll give you a more complex response, which I just thought was kind of hilarious. But Katie, where do you want people to look you up to learn more about you?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. If you want to come check out the Legal Keys podcast, we'd love to have you on if you're interested in the AI space. We talk business, we talk law. We're easing our way into the healthcare space as well. So Legal Keys podcast, if you want to connect on LinkedIn, Katie Carlson at Faster Outcomes, and all of our socials are Faster Outcomes.
Thank you so much, Katie, for being a guest and coming on today. Really appreciate it. See everyone next time.